order. Thank you to Chuck Slatkin and Bernadette Evangelista for getting this. Yes, it's good to hear with Joseph Stalin. Since I get called a tanky now all the time. You're a tanky for being against war and regime change. Like even mainstream people use this old obscure Trotskyist term, tanky. It's weird. We're living in weird times. I wrote down some thoughts when I was in the green room, and I'll just kind of read them off, and hopefully it doesn't last much longer than 10 minutes, because the panel, we have to basically each all say a different version of the same really important thing during Q&A. I want to kind of pick up where Margaret left off, because she was talking about the Vietnam War, the era of liberation movements, which were attacked by COINTELPRO, by information war managed by the FBI, destabilization campaign. I remember a time not too long ago in a galaxy not far away when hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers marched in the streets against a war. Do you all remember that? Yeah. What the hell happened? I mean, it's good to see so many people out here, but the wars never stopped. But the rallies against them, they kind of dwindled out. Notice that. It's just like us and our friends, like, hey, what's up? How you doing? 2 minutes. You're looking well. And the most shocking thing is that some of our major progressive media institutions have actually become platforms for promoting these wars. And I'm not going to name any names. You don't know what I'm talking about. Okay. Many self-identified progressives, as Aaron has demonstrated again and again, have become captives to the partisan theater scripted by the bureaucratic architecture of the national security state that has on its record the destabilization of large swaths of the globe. And so while Chileans and Haitians and Ecuadorians and indigenous and leftist Bolivians are in open revolt against austerity policies and right-wing governments imposed on them from within and without, so many self-styled progressives have been reduced to spectators, captivated by wall-to-wall coverage of Russiagate and Ukrainegate on corporate networks that function as a de facto retirement community for disgruntled spooks. Managers of our national security state, these soft-handed super predators, seem to have learned the lessons of Iraq, which is that even the most advanced conventional army on earth can be ground down by a few committed fedayeen. And that middle-class Americans will take to the streets when the coffins of their boys come home. And so the national security state has turned to hybrid warfare, a sophisticated three-tiered method of war-making that contains little risk of domestic political repercussions. Though, as I illustrated in my book, The Management of Savagery, it's absolutely guaranteed to generate blowback in the form of, for example, mass civilian casualty events like the Manchester bombing carried out by a UK proxy fighter who helped destroy the Libyan government and went to and from Libya on the MI6 rat line, or through the rise of right-wing nationalist forces from Western Europe to Washington, who successfully exploited the fear and loathing of desperate refugees created by NATO's regime change wars. The first dimension of hybrid warfare should be the most familiar, non-conventional war, or arming the rebels, the moderate rebels, as we've seen in Syria, in Libya, and as we see in Ukraine, where arms are even flowing into the hands of the neo-Nazi Azov Battalion, despite the best efforts of members of Congress like John Conyers, who's no longer there. And before that, we know about the arming of the Contras in Central America. For some reason, Democrats were willing to speak out against that at that time. Different era. When the government the rebels are facing begins to kill and imprison them in ham-handed fashion in order to preserve the state that is under attack by the most powerful empire in history, that government becomes the target of 800-page Human Rights Watch reports, and then faces the second weapon in hybrid warfare, which is sanctions or unilateral coercive measures aimed to destroy their economies and pulverize their civilian populations. I just witnessed a really disturbing interview with Elizabeth Warren on Pod Save America, this podcast of these kind of like yuppie Democratic apparatchiks. And this guy, I think it's like Tommy Vitor, is saying, you know, Trump has such a great policy in Venezuela. It's a brilliant diplomatic move, and you know, not just recognizing Juan Guaido, who's like the Pete Buttigieg of Latin America. But in preventing Venezuela from having an economy, he said, preventing Venezuela from having an economy. And Elizabeth Warren comes up and she said, you know, she was and I think she was going to say something rational. She said, I'm all for the sanctions. I'm all for that. I'm all for recognizing Juan Guaido. And she's just all in. I mean, I guess this is what Hillary Clinton meant by saying she was going to run again. And say, big structural change failing, rolled over for IMF structural readjustment policy failure. This is the insidiousness, again, of hybrid warfare, where you have a self-styled progressive advancing economic terrorism against civilian populations from Venezuela to Iran to Syria, where people went without heating oil last winter. The final and most insidious aspect of hybrid warfare, which we're pretty much talking about tonight, is information warfare. This modality weaponizes the media and civil society to generate consent among the public for what impeachment celebrity and previously unknown national security apparatchik Alexander Vindman called the interagency consensus of foreign policy, which the president is apparently forbidden from opposing even if he or she was elected to do so. You know, the intelligence community, which is neither communal nor intelligent, trying to say on foreign policy. And whoever we vote for doesn't matter. And what does he mean by the consensus of foreign policy? He means regime change, empire. So in order to manufacture consent for the imperial foreign policy consensus, our national security state establishes propaganda constructs to invent reality. These entities are often funded by CIA spin-offs like USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy, which was created to do what its co-founder Alan Weinstein said the CIA used to do covertly, but this time overtly, in the open. The NED is the engine of violent right-wing opposition movements from Nicaragua to Venezuela to Bolivia, where the US-backed coup leader, Luis Fernando Camacho, and his SIG Highland paramilitaries have terrorized indigenous people for years. Behold the fruits of democracy promotion. I have 2 minutes, and I was going to talk a little about the most notable and award-winning propaganda construct known as the Syrian White Helmets, which were established not in Syria, but in Turkey by a former military intelligence officer named James Le Mercier, handed over $100 million by the British Foreign Office, USAID, given HD cameras to enter areas controlled by the local affiliate of Al-Qaeda and its allies, areas where Western journalists were forbidden from entering for fear of literally losing their heads. And they were at the forefront of every major red line event alleging chemical weapons use and successfully helping to trigger US military interventions which prolonged the war and prolonged the death of so many Syrians, and who now face unprecedented scrutiny thanks to the appearance of the 2 previously mentioned whistleblowers in the OPCW, who alleged that the Duma chemical weapons attack was in fact not a chemical weapons attack and a pro-war fabrication. We relied to, again, the mysterious death of Le Mercier, who's been branded a hero by the New York Times and a white savior by the Washington Post, who, according to one, the Washington Post Middle East correspondent, saved more people than anyone in Syria, has been predictably swept under the rug, more so than Jeffrey Epstein's death. The few isolated critics of this propaganda construct who are like, could fit in this room and probably are in this room, and have, regime change operations in Latin America, of domestic political deceptions like Russiagate have been blacklisted, labeled Assadists, Russian and Venezuelan assets, and suppressed on social media, while Pod Save America is pushed to the top of your YouTube feed. National security state marionettes like Jake Tapper win awards and plaudits for pushing the consensus line, while the most important journalist and publisher of our time, Julian Assange, languishes in a cell. I'm about to stop. I thought about Assange a lot in my own prison cell, where I spent 2 days on a false charge fabricated by members of a US-backed Venezuelan opposition. And I thought about what we could do to support him. And one thing we can do is to continue to use WikiLeaks as a treasure trove of information, of proven facts exposing the sadism of the security state, and to inform the public about what empire truly does and what it means for people on the other side of the gun. And at the gray zone, we've been going to the ground and breaking the media blockade in countries that are targeted for regime change simply for their desire to be independent and sovereign, and in some cases, socialist. We are going to say the unsaid and the unsayable, because so much of propaganda is rendering us silent and rendering the public ignorant. We are going to put out the fires that these arsonists keep lighting across the globe. And finally, I just thank all of you for all the support you've shown me in these past weeks. And we'll be talking more about that throughout the night. Thank you.